Hello everybody, this is Rottweiler Red 95, and I decided to do a part 2 of my original review of the AKM assault rifle in Battlefield Hardline. Now, if you haven't watched that, I advise you to go and do it. The link is in the description below. The quintessential assault rifle of the 20th century, the AK-47, through record-breaking widespread functionality and durability, made it the ultimate symbol in revolution and Soviet influence. Yet, to appreciate this formidable weapon, we must first know its history. When in late 1942, during the Great Patriotic War, the Red Army acquired captured Nazi MKB-42s, an early prototype of the modern assault rifle that led to the first practical assault rifle, the SEG-44. This rifle introduced a new concept in ammunition, the intermediate caliber. The 7.92 by 33mm Kurz, although less powerful than the deadly 8mm Mauser, was lighter and still would outperform any pistol caliber available at the time, in both ballistic trauma and range, capable of delivering a killing blow up to 400 meters. This prompted the Soviets to develop their own intermediate caliber, the M43, or 7.62 by 39mm as we know it today. And in 1944 a contest was held to adopt a rifle chambered for this caliber. Mikhail Kalashnikov entered this competition with a select fire carbine chambered in the new 7.62 by 39mm cartridge. Up until then, Kalashnikov was a mere tank sergeant. Yet, although ingenious, his design was passed on in favor of another design by Sergei Zeminov, the SKS, which ironically was already obsolete and ill-fit for the kind of combat employed by the Red Army. Therefore, the adoption of an assault rifle was inevitable. From 1945 to 1946, he continued his design that resulted in the AK-47, Avtomat Kalashnikova, model of 1947. To quote the man himself, "This weapon is in fact an example of simplicity and reliability." It was officially adopted in 1949. But it was only in 1956 that the Soviet Union fully developed the production procedure, and thus the heavy steel mill receiver was replaced by a stamped receiver that reduced the weight of the gun significantly. The steel magazine was also replaced by a Bakelite one. The trigger was improved upon. That resulted in better accuracy. The barrel was threaded and equipped with a slant-cut compensator that could be replaced by a PBS-1 suppressor, as used in conjunction with subsonic ammo by the Spetsnaz, and on top of that, the addition of a side rail for mounting optics. This rifle received the designation of AKM, Avtomat Kalashnikova Modernizowanie. I've got to give it to Visceral for the depiction of the AKM in-game and what comes for the realism of the gun's performance in combat. For this reason, I use this rifle almost exclusively, amassing as of the moment of this review 16,227 kills with it, and thus holding the top of the leaderboard with this rifle. And since this video is dedicated to Mikhail Kalashnikov, by the anniversary of his death, in order to, in my way, honor this man, I will have amounted 23,000 kills with his creation. Now, without further ado, let's address the stats of the AKM. Damage-wise, this gun is the link between assault rifles and the battle rifles, dealing 36 up to 30 meters when it starts to drop off until 50 meters when it starts dealing 24 damage. So the AK is a free shot kill up to 34 meters, but between 35 and 45 meters there is no way to win against an M16 or M416, since these still are more accurate and controllable, plus they fire over 200 rounds per minute faster than the AKM. This 600 RPM rate of fire also becomes an handicap versus the armor insert, making headshots imperative. Recoil-wise, the AKM kicks like a Ural Mountains mule, with a climb of 0.6 degrees, a horizontal deviation of 0.15 to the left and a 0.4 to the right. To make matters worse, the rifle suffers from a relentless first shot recoil multiplier of 3. Spread-wise, the gun is a disaster as well, with a spread increase of 0.12. This makes the AKM the least accurate gun in its category. But if you can get around these shortcomings, the AKM becomes a serious powerhouse. Its damage module, combined with a 30+1 capacity, grants you with enough firepower to deal with a considerable number of assailants. And with its 580 m/s muzzle velocity, you should in fact engage long-range and moving targets with relative ease. And although this gets reduced to 320 m/s when suppressed, being stealthy and timing your reloads should be just as effective. Just remember that these will take you 3.37 seconds when depleted and 2.65 seconds if a round is still in the chamber. As for attachments, I myself would advise you to run the muzzle brake. That is an absolute must, since the muzzle brake reduces your vertical recoil by 18% and your side-to-side recoil by 50%. Therefore, you get a pull to the right of only 0.2 and your vertical will be reduced to 0.495. Now, the muzzle brake also affects your recoil decrease per second, going from a standard 15 spread decrease per second to a very comfortable 22.5 recoil spread decrease per second. Therefore, the gun becomes much more trustworthy when burst firing or tap firing at range. Now, recoil wise, again, it becomes kind of a trouble due to that 3 times first shot recoil multiplier. So if you are really more trying to go at range with this rifle, I would advise you to equip the angle grip, because if you just tap fire it correctly, you're going to get splendid accuracy still using the muzzle brake. Do not go with the heavy barrel. I know it might be tempting, but the heavy barrel in Battlefield Hardline does actually affect your accuracy in a bad way if you're moving. Yet it does reduce mildly your recoil, but the recoil decretion with the muzzle brake is still preferable over the heavy barrel. Plus, penalty to your moving accuracy is something I would rather avoid, since mobility in a game that is as fast-paced as Battlefield Hardline is just gold. It's the most important thing. Do not stop moving. You will die. You will be back in the spawn screen really fast if you just sit down and try to take pop shots at range, especially against the snipers and the high mobility class that is the mechanic. While snipers will have no problem in still gunning you down. Now, if you're moving, you might be able to gun them down in semi-automatic, or if you tap fire the gun. Therefore, the grip that I'm actually going to recommend is the stubby grip, since it reduces 50% of your spread while standing and also gives you a minor benefit whilst you're moving and aiming down the sights, although does not really affect your hipfire accuracy. That's another thing about the muzzle brake. There are no negative effects of the muzzle brake, so why not run it? Just out of curiosity, the muzzle brake that we have in game is Venom Tactical Antidote. I will leave a link in the description for that muzzle brake as well as I will leave for the story, basically a documentary on the story of the AKM assault rifle and its designer Mikhail Kalashnikov, which, by the way, I must say I really admire the man. He undoubtedly created one of the most phenomenal weapons in modern history. Doesn't matter where you are, what war you're fighting, where that war is going on, you are almost guaranteed to come across an AK or an AK-47 or one of its variants. A number of rifles have been taking this gun as a base to build upon. The SIG 553 that we have in game is actually basically an M16 crossed with an AK. It uses the same gas system, the long stroke gas piston system of the AK, and there are a number of other comparable features. Another gun is the ARM, also present in game, and the Galil Ace, like the Kar-556 or the Ace-23 of Battlefield 4. Those guns are all basically different interpretations of the AK assault rifle. Now, there is this infamy to the AK, and this plagued Mikhail Kalashnikov in his later years, that this gun was being used for acts of terror. And in fact, in 1979, during the Soviet war in Afghanistan, Soviet troops went against their own guns, so to say. These guns that the Mujahideen were using, the Mujahideen who later became the Al-Qaeda, were bought by the US out of China and delivered to the Mujahideen for them to use against the Soviet troops that were invading. Well, let's just say, Soviets' generosity kind of backfired on them, because the Chinese got a hold of the AK design because the Soviets handed over a building permit for these rifles to the Chinese. Those became the Type 56 assault rifles, and those also saw a lot of action in Vietnam against American troops, ironically. Again, the Cold War era was an era full of irony and tricks and treachery backfiring on people. And the AK was probably one of its survivors. It did actually outperform the M16 in a number of ways. It was more lethal. It was more reliable. In the Vietnam War, AKs were never ever known to jam or misfire or malfunction in any way, or even break. Peasants would bury them in rice fields, in watery rice fields, for the night, and the next day they would pick them up and the guns would fire. There are even accounts of soldiers who found rusted out AKs left over by VC, Viet Cong, and North Vietnamese army regulars, and they would just pick up these rusty guns, unlock the bolt with their own boots, and the gun would fire and function correctly. Even so, special forces units like Rangers and SEALs would often be seen carrying captured AK-47 rifles and Type 56 rifles. For that reason, they were extremely reliable, and the accuracy wasn't really lacking, because we were talking about close quarters jungle warfare, guerrilla warfare. So accuracy and range was no longer a much needed feature in combat rifles. That was also what led to the development of the MKB-42 that led to the SEG-44, as I mentioned earlier. For that was German weapon, by the way. So yeah. Now, I personally choose to run only the anti-dock muzzle brake on my AKM. Why? Because honestly, we need to fall in line with Mikhail Kalashnikov's principle of simplicity. Plus, I don't want to temper with the good looks of the gun. Yes, I do find the AKM to be one of the most beautiful assault rifles ever designed. I like the wood. It gives me wood. And plus, I don't find optics or an extended magazine to come in handy. The extended magazine seems like overkill, and the optics, honestly, the iron sights are good enough. They are open enough, you'll be able to see just as many targets, if not more, than with a red dot sight. Therefore, I run it as it is. Well guys, hope you enjoyed. That was part 2 of my AKM review.